I don't think there were many relationships in the past where I talked about values and vision and lifestyle
Right.
until it was too late.
Correct.
When
Correct.
we're
That's the
breaking
point.
down
Yes.
and it's like there's
That's right.
frustration and we're like, what are we doing?
Right.
But we've already chemically bonded and we've already like gotten
Mm-hmm.
deeper into a commitment. And you're like, well, we just lacked the, I guess, emotional courage or intelligence to have those conversations early.
And I just don't think a lot of people live their lives from that examined standpoint. Like, what are my values? What do I stand for? If people are like, what do you mean, what do I stand for? I can't afford gas, you know? And
Right.
so that, and I understand
Surviving,
that,
yeah.
right? I'm surviving. You are surviving, but there are certain things that you're willing to fight, really, really fight for and be, and that you actually do need in your life. For some people, for example, spirituality may really matter. You cannot minimize that. And if a person for whom spirituality matters enters into a relationship for someone who doesn't, it's not an indictment of either of them, but that may not be a language they can use with each other, which might leave both of them frustrated. But there's some things that you're not going to fully map on to someone else. Someone may say, I'm very comfortable with your spiritual world. I'm simply not going to participate in it. And then that will work. And they'll say, I can see how joyful it makes you. But what the struggle here, though, the main sort of pushback I'm going to have on your list is your list is predicated on two healthy people.
That's why step one is both need to be healing.
Yeah, and so...
And both need to be in a therapeutic journey together. That's why for me, it's if one person is working on their healing journey and doing some type of therapy consistently with accountability and emotional intelligence and integrating that process, and the other is not, I feel like it's going to be challenging. That's why
I think it's going to be impossible.
That's why I said enter the relationship in therapy, which again, this is maybe hard for people to do.
I think it's great to enter a relationship in therapy. It's just not a typical third date activity. Hey,
I get it.
Instead of going out for drinks, you want to come to therapy?
This is after a few months. You know? This is after
but
a few
even
months,
still, I do
it.
think that there's a business for me to open, like third date therapy.
But here's the thing. What's the alternative? Getting in a relationship where 50%, go through divorce within however many years, and then those that stay together more unhappy, and then you're suffering and you're feeling trapped and you feel stuck. And it seems like very few in their first marriage create a peaceful, thriving life with, challenges and bumps along the way, but it just seems like it's rare. And so if you want that, if you want a healthy, thriving, long-term committed relationship, not perfect, but a healthy one, I mean, I feel like it's rare. You got to do the extreme or the different things that people have never done. I don't know.
Right, but you also have to value yourself, and that's the work, right? Is for a person to be able to say, I am valuable. And if a person can get there, all relationships in some ways have a fighting chance, not toxic ones, but because they do value themselves. So they're willing to set a boundary. They're willing to extract from unhealthy situations. They're mindful and aware of what another person, they're self-aware. They're able to, and also aware of another person and can make judgments and statements and all of that about in an informed, aware manner. And then above all else, they have empathy, right? And either you got it or you don't. And in the absence of empathy, your whole system goes away, right? Without that, this doesn't work.
Empathy, yeah.
And I think that there's, I think that a lot of people right now in the world are engaging in pseudo healing. And I think it's just narcissistic navel gazing, and they're actually not really healing.
What does that mean, pseudo
I
healing?
think is that they're doing whatever they're doing. Like, I meditate 75 times a day, and I do mindfulness this, and I ayahuasca that, and blah, 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 blah. And they do all of that, but they're still really going through the world in a rather monstrous, entitled, dismissive, contemptuous way. But it's sort of like, what I call healing porn or recovery porn. Like, look at my recovery, I'm so recovery-ish. And
it's like a spiritual bypass.
Exactly, it's a spiritual bypass. And that gives me pause. So you can't even just say, oh, they're doing all this work on themselves. I don't care how much work they're doing on themselves.
How are they showing up?
Their behavior, exactly.
Yeah, how are you showing up? What's your thoughts on plant medicine as a professional, in terms of a therapy, in terms of helping people heal?
Right. I'm always I tread so lightly here because as a licensed person, I always have to recognize that my feedback will always carry weight. I'm not an MD, so I can't prescribe medication. I do believe this, though. What's happening in plant medicine, what's happening in the psychedelic world is the future of psychiatry. I do. I think that there's things happening there. So the early clinical trials on MDMA and PTSD we're seeing some really extraordinary things starting to happen.
Interesting.
And I'm enough of a cynic, and I don't know, maybe I look like I have a tinfoil hat right now, but I do believe Big Pharma doesn't want this to happen, because I think that there may be a lot of answers lurking there. But folks, this is not about you going home and going to a rave and doing some MDMA and saying, oh, I'm treating myself for PTSD. No, 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 no. The treatment protocols for this have to be done with licensed people in controlled settings. Therapy is happening while the person is using the psychedelic. This is under it has to be done under the most clear, formatted protocol. So this isn't just like party drug time and look at me, I'm treating myself. This is not self-medication. It's none of that. This is highly controlled. The dosages are controlled, but I do think there's a tremendous future there. It would be arrogant for me to say otherwise. And when I've talked with folks doing this kind of work, it's impressive what they're showing. I'd like to see more data. I'm not, when it comes to what I do from a practice perspective, for example, I can't say to someone, you need to be on Zoloft. I have to say, I'm going to give you a referral to a psychiatrist. You will work with that psychiatrist, and they will make whatever medication recommendation they have for you. But I can't, the way my license works, make clear recommendations. So if a client of mine says, I want to explore this, I'll say, if you do, we just simply need to make sure you're doing it with a licensed, so somebody who's doing this in a very legitimized, thoughtful kind of a way.
Yeah, I feel like I have an open mind to a lot of things, but for whatever reason, I'm going to be intentional with my words here. I've met a lot of people. I have a lot of friends who've done lots of different, ayahuasca and plant medicine journeys and experiences and retreats and all these things that swear by it, right?
Yeah.
And people I respect, people that I love and I appreciate, and nothing wrong with it. But years down the road, I don't see it having like the healing effect that
Correct.
I'm like, okay, well, you keep going to doing it, but where is the progress? There's like a week or two of this euphoria,
Yes.
But then you're still struggling in your relationship. You're still being a bad person. You're still, and it's not for everyone that does this that I know, but I've experienced that where people swear by it as this euphoria experience, but then 6 months later they're suffering again.
Right. Then there's the bypass, though, right? Because the work. And I've worked with narcissistic clients, Louis. It's not like I'm only on the survivor side. I've worked with many in my time. And let me tell you,
exhausting,
I mean, I feel like Foreman in the ring. And mercifully, I'm actually really good.
Yes.
And, actually more like Ali, because I can get him against the ropes and exhaust them.
And you probably created an energy field so you're not like being...
Yeah. Or I can take actually, no. Foreman gets him against the ropes. Ali can take the punches.
Yeah,
I can take the punches. And so but what I would see is I would say because here's the thing, what would be really interesting being in the room with a narcissistic client who actually saw through the therapy. They didn't drop out. One of the interesting things for me, I was fortunate because I had no spots in my practice, and I've completely downsized it and mostly have ended most of it. But back in the day, I'd say, you don't show up, you lose your slot, and you're not in this practice. And I'm like, well, I don't want to lose my slot, right? They don't like that. So they'd show up. But the fact is that when they'd show up, they would sometimes say like, I would say, gosh, that thing you just told me you said to your wife, like, how did she feel? And how do you, no, they'd be like, oh, I didn't really think about it. I'm like, let's think about it, shall we? And that's something called mentalization. When you have someone reflect on what they think, how they think someone feels, how they think their behavior is affecting someone, like put yourself in that head space. So I said, how do you think your wife felt when you did X or Y? Oh yeah, I guess that wasn't cool. Okay, so what might you want someone to do for you in that circumstance, right? Get him to do it.
That's good.
And they would sometimes say like, yeah, you're right, that wasn't. So they weren't like punching me in the face. They were just kind of like, okay, that wasn't cool. Would they keep making the same mistakes? Yes. Me repeatedly saying, what do you think she felt? Or sometimes I'd even say like, that's not cool. That was that. And I would often say, how would you feel if your wife saw the text that you sent? I divorce her. Really? And so and I said, do you see you have a double standard? Here's my point though, Louis. And one of the most, now this is going to be sort of a composite of multiple people, from a confidentiality perspective. But
sure.
I do remember working with a series of people to the end of their relationships. And a couple of them said, more than a few said, you're telling me to make my marriage work, I got to listen to her talk about her emotional stuff. You know, she's getting old. I don't even like to look at her that much anymore. You're telling me that I can't, like, all right, so I'm just having sex with this other person, but you're telling me it hurts her. And they're like,
Oh
and
my
they'll be
gosh.
like, okay, so you're telling me I've got to listen to her and I have to care about her feelings and you're also telling me I have to do this with this other woman I'm having sex with who thinks I'm going to have a relationship with her, please.
Oh
And
my
like
gosh.
that. Okay. So you know what? I remember in one of my more successful, some of the more successful cases, they come back and say, I divorced the wife and I dumped the mistress. Like if I don't want to be causing this much harm, they weren't sadistic, and after the therapy, they're like, okay, if this is never going to change, it's very clear I want to do what I want to do. And I thought that was a win. They're like, I'm not changing. Yeah. They were even aware they weren't going to change. They're like, I'm not listening to her nonsense. And I don't like looking at her. And I don't think she's attractive anymore. It's like, yikes.
But it's a win for her
it's a
and
win
for them.
the other people have been released. Now,
that's big.
Most narcissistic folks or people with these personalities don't stay in therapy. They're not great candidates for therapy. And my guess is to your point about these people who all slide backwards, there ain't enough ayahuasca in the world to turn these people around. Right. I can tell you that right now. There's not enough MDMA. There's nothing. I think everyone's looking for the empathy pill, right? That's what it's not how it works. There's just no such thing.
There needs to be this could be something that unlocks you and allows you to start processing and bringing up, potential wounds that you could start to heal.
To do that work,
but
yes.
But you've got to be willing to do some other therapies that's
Correct.
not, external focused around like a medical drug or something.
No, you have to do the inner work.
You've got to do the inner work to continue that journey.
Right, exactly. And that's why I'm saying that any of the protocols that are showing any efficacy around things like PTSD and everything have to be done in a managed circumstance. And to your point, I remember once meeting a guy swearing by whatever psychedelic they're swearing by.
This is it. Yes.
Can I curse on here? Because I'm going to tell you right now,
this
guy was
the
biggest a-hole I have ever met. I mean, he was just
a jerk.
Just a jerk and cold and abrupt. And but yet he had the audacity to say, I am so empathic now. I'm like, ooh. Okay, that's not how it's usually done. And I had no skin in this game. I was just sort of watching this conversation happen. He was talking to a group of people, but he was just a jerk for the full 2 days I had to spend in his presence, and yet was extolling how much growth he had had. And so I don't know what that meant to him. And maybe people in his life thought there was progress. Remember, if you're starting from -10, even getting up to 0 is growth.
Right.
So there is that too.
Right.
But it's really tough because I do think there was an interesting article in the New York Times, actually, I think it was today or yesterday, about this idea of does being in therapy make me a good person? And is that what the point of therapy is, to make someone a good person? What really is a good person? So it really raised a lot of philosophical issues. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
And it's subjective to a point, but I don't think it is. I think one thing we do know when we look at personality, in general, I do think we do believe that compassion and respect make for a good person, but we also live in a world where people like that are viewed as suckers.
Right. You have to have discernment around things and not just buy into what everyone's saying.
But it's not even that. If you're just, especially men, and I really feel for men having to endure this. If you're compassionate, sweet, and respectful, often those are not masculinized qualities.
Looking as a weak man that you can take advantage of.
Versus the guy who is like a corporate raider, who has a ton of money, who drives the fast car, is somehow viewed as strong. Right now that's right there, the paradox of what masculinity is in our modern age. Until we can make compassion sexy, we're in trouble.
What do you wish every man could learn to develop more of in society?
Being vulnerable with emotion, to share vulnerability, to share sadness. The number of men, for example, who've been sexually abused, we don't talk about it.
1 in 6.
Yeah, exactly. And for women, there's actually, at least in therapy, I'm talking about the safe space, but I'm telling you, for clients I've worked with male clients, I remember some of them saying, I have somebody to talk to you. Can we do this session by phone? I don't want to look at your face.
So shameful.
So shameful. And I think that And when I taught abnormal psychology at the university level, and I was teaching about adverse childhood experiences like child sexual abuse, what I did notice was that some of the male students were really shifting uncomfortably in their seats. And I would slow down. I'm like, listen, if we can take this topic slow. It felt like the women in the class had processed that a little bit more on the macro, like overall, than the male students in the class. So I think that to hold space, to be able to feel safe with talking about their insecurities, their vulnerabilities, their feelings, to show tears. I mean, there is nothing more beautiful when a person's able not to cry because they're feeling a genuine emotion. And I think of how we pathologize men for doing that. We literally pathologize. It'll be the cold open on Saturday Night Live. They'll make jokes about it. There'll be memes about it. It horrifies me. So why would a man ever be vulnerable if he thinks he's going to be turned into a big
made
joke?
Fun of, yeah. It's interesting you say this, and I wrote a book 5 years ago called The Mask of Masculinity, which is about my journey of letting go of anger, frustration, resentment, and stepping more into vulnerability, right? The healing journey and allowing myself to be vulnerable, talking about sexual abuse for the first time in 25 years since it happened, and just unpacking it all, what it means to be a man, how to take off these masks. And in the process of doing this, I would go to events and talk about the book, right? And there would probably be 50-50 men and women who would be in the room. And I would ask at some point in the event, I'd say, all the women in the room, raise your hand if you once a week talk to your girlfriends, or you have a place where you can go and talk about your challenges or insecurities or fears and things like this of life. Your body, shaming issues, whatever it might be, you can talk to someone about it. And pretty much every woman in the room would raise their hand. I say, keep your hands up if you do this every day with your girlfriends, your mom, your sister, and pretty much all of them kind of laugh and say, yeah, I call people every day. And I said, okay, the guys in the room, raise your hand. If you do this once a month, you talk with your guy friends and you feel safe to be vulnerable and open up about your insecurities and all these different things as well. Maybe 2 hands out of hundreds once a month would raise their hand. And I'd say, are you guys part of a church group that does this kind of like mandatory, structural thing where you feel safe in this place? And they all kind of laugh like, yes. And I go, how many of you do this once a year? No hands. And so I go, ladies, imagine going once a month. Correct. Not even going once a month. Not even going once a year. Imagine going a lifetime without ever being vulnerable and opening up because you feel like you're going to be shamed. Just think about the weight. I'm not saying how men act and treat you and this is okay, or actions are okay, but just think about
it's true.
That.
It's true.
And I talked to different men throughout this period who said, Lewis, I started the opening up with my wife, and after years, that she would always say, I wish you were more vulnerable. I wish you would show emotion more, not just be stoic or angry. And some men would say, listen, I started to do this, and I got the worst response from my wife, my partner.
Interesting.
Because they weren't available to receive me being, they're so used to me being stoic and having it all together that when I was emotional, they needed me to be strong for their emotional challenges. Some of these women, I'm not saying all these women. So how do we get women to be accepting of men starting to shift and to show emotion, to cry, to say, hey, I'm struggling. I'm really going with some issues right now. And I've got some stuff I got to deal with. How do we get women also to be like, hey, it's encouraging, it's okay, and keep a safe space so that men will continue to and not be like, well, I'm never doing that again. She made fun of me. Like, why would I ever do this? I'm going to be strong and tough again.
And that's something that everyone has to work on is how to say what are our biases about masculinity. How do we, will that change how you view a partner? Would that, again, you and I was watching you talk about something recently where someone was talking about masculine and feminine energy and all that. I'm not so sure I agree with that dichotomy, to be honest with you, but I do think that it is the shaming of emotion and anger being the only acceptable emotion. So men use that. They've turned it into like the Swiss Army knife of emotion. I'm sad, I'm going to be angry. I'm vulnerable, I'm going to be angry. Angry, 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 right? It's just like the one-stop shop kind of thing. And to me, anger is an incredibly acceptable, healthy emotion. It's in the whole, but it's meant to be a whole drawer full of stuff, not just one emotion you use for everything. And that's the challenge, is that men do have emotion, anger. And it's sort of switching that up, societally not pathologizing that, and women holding space for that. But I think the other piece for men is I want them to have more deep friendships. Again, something else I read, a great article I read about a guy wrote this idea of how many men out there have colonoscopy friends. And that headline grabbed me, so I kept reading. And you know what his point was? I think he had a girlfriend or wife or something. And he said, if she wasn't in my life, there's nobody to drive me home from a colonoscopy, because you can't drive yourself home and you can't take an Uber home. So a person has to come and get you at the colonoscopy.
That's vulnerable.
So it's very vulnerable. And
Man.
most men don't have and this is like men over the age of 40, which is when you would be getting a colonoscopy, that men often don't have friendships. They have like, let's go play golf, let's go watch a game, let's meet at a bar. But that person, where women are really good at that. And in fact, it's why women often fare better later in life after a spouse dies. Whereas a guy, it's sort of like they'll often decline rather quickly. Some women, not because they flourish, but some women actually do flourish, but they often have a stronger support network. Because women are often doing that cultivating of social relationships. And so, because that's just something that's more validated for them. And so, and I love that analogy of the colonoscopy friend, like the person you call and say, can you pick me up from this? And that, go to work, so of course, I'm thinking of the friends I have, like, if you give me enough notice, of course I'm going to come get you. And there's dozens of women I would do that for. And so, when I even ran that by my partner, he got really sad. He's like, I have any colonoscopy friends. Yeah, and he's like, I got to work on that. And so, yeah, you can start recognizing those patterns of what just doesn't feel right. But if you roll right into it, it's almost like a recreation of the old cycle. You need that separation. You need a break from anniversary dates. You need to have that first birthday alone, their first birthday alone, the holidays you do, the vacations you take. You've got to go live a life without them.